Hi, my name is Todd Lamley, and welcome to Module 4 of the CCNA 14 module series. This series or module is called the Cisco Router Interface, and we're going to learn about the Cisco IOS, the Internetworking Operating System. We're going to learn about how to configure the iOS on a router, how to connect to a router and configure a router, as well as how to set IP addresses on an interface and how to verify them. So let's go ahead and get started on Module 4. Now, the first thing that happens when a router boots up is it performs a power on self-test, a post-test. This post-test is stored in ROM. This is like in any computer. It's no different. Once the post-test, power on self-test passes, saying everything's okay, we're also going to stay in ROM and load what's called a bootstrap code. In the router, it's going to say the bootstrap code, the bootstrap code in the router is going to go look in NVRAM for what's called a configuration register setting. And basically what the bootstrap code is looking for is where are we going to find and load the Cisco iOS software. In this case, by default, all Cisco routers come out of the factory and all Cisco iOSs are stored in flash memory. So again, we're going to load the post. Everything works out okay. Load the bootstrap. The bootstrap will look to make sure nothing's changed. We're all at default. If it is, we'll go to flash and load the Cisco iOS. Once the iOS runs, it'll go and look for a configuration file stored back in NVRAM. This file is called startup config. If there is no configuration, then the router will come up and go into setup mode. Now, typically there will be no configuration on a Cisco router when you get it. However, some of the newer routers, the ISR integrated services routers, have a small configuration stored in startup config that will show us or allow us to get in through HTTPS and configure the router through a small GUI. We'll talk about that later. Right now it's not important. What we want to understand from this is that we will find the configuration, if there is one. We will copy it and place it in RAM. So this configuration is called startup-config. We're going to copy it, put it in RAM, and call it running-config. This is now what's running the router. So the running-config is a file that you will manipulate and change if you want to configure the router. If you want to then change and save the router, or save this configuration, then you will save this running config back into NVRAM and call it startup-config and basically write over that file. There's two different modes that allow us to look and configure a router. The first mode is called user mode, where we cannot configure the router. We can only view a very limited amount of the switch or router. We can tell that we're at user mode because it says router greater than sign. We really want to be at something called privileged mode. This allows us to configure the router or switch. And the way to get there is with the command enable, which is why sometimes we call this enable mode. We can tell we're at privileged mode because our prompt says router #. So command prompts on the devices will say switch # or router # depending on what we're at. So we cannot configure or view the router if we're not here at privileged mode. Now, to use our router context sensitive help, works on a switch as well, of course. We're at user mode or privileged mode. The question mark works at either mode. But we can only see what we can do from that prompt. So in this case, I don't know how to spell clock. It says translating clock. It says, what? I don't understand. This is not a command. I say, gosh, I can't remember how to spell clock. Okay, I know this is a simple example, but it's a good example in how to use a question mark. So we say clock. We know it starts with CL, but that's all we know about it. CL question mark. Everything that starts with CL will be displayed. And then we're going to say, okay, that's the command I want. Clock. I press enter. It says incomplete command. So the way that I fix that is up arrow. Then I do a space question mark because up arrow will display the last command entered. So I'll say clock space question mark. And you can see the next command is set. Keep using my question mark. I just keep up question mark until I can see everything that I want. It'll say hours, minutes, seconds, days, months. Well, when I got to here, I did that and I pressed enter and it gave me this caret saying, wait a minute, months isn't right. What it wanted me to do was type out August here, and then it will want the year and so on. So by using the question mark, if I have no space, it'll tell me everything that starts with those commands. If I have a space, it'll tell me the next commands that I can enter. Now, in enhanced editing, I use Control-A to move to the beginning of a command line. Control-E takes my cursor to the end of the command line. Honestly, I pretty much only use these. I can use my arrow keys to move between the commands, but you could use these other ones, of course. The other one I use is the Tab key. For example, if I type show run, which I can only do from privileged mode to see the running config, it'll finish typing the command for me by typing show running -config. The output, of course, would be the same. This tab key is only just for, so you can use shortcuts or not, depending, you just don't want to type as much, and I'll use the tab key a lot since I don't like to type too much. Also, the up and down arrows are used to, like a DOS key that shows me the last and previous commands entered. Now let's take a look at some router interfaces. The first thing we're going to notice is we have our LAN connections here. These will show me I have two 10100 Ethernets. And these are my proprietary Cisco connections. I have a Cisco, this is an older serial connection. Notice it takes up one spot and I only have one connection. And I have, these are called smart serials, and this is called a WIC that fits in this slot. And because I get two serials, it says serial 0, serial 1. And these are in different slots here. So inside this router, this is a modular router because it allows me to take modules out and put them in. Now these are my management ports. Now we're going to call these out of band because I'm going to configure the router outside the network, connect my console port of a laptop or PC into here using my COM port, using a rolled cable into the console port, and this allows me to manage the router and configure it. The auxiliary port is the same as a console port, except it allows you to put modem commands on it, so you can connect a modem up to it, dial up that modem, and get a console connection. This screen shows the router components, or basically the memory, and some of the commands we can use to see the components inside there. Inside the ROM, of course, is the post, don't forget, and the bootstrap. But we also have a small little iOS that'll load if this one fails. So inside Flash by default is our iOS, Internet Working Operating System. NVRAM, inside there, of course, the configuration register is stored here. We can't view it from here. We have to type something called show version to see our configuration register. That's the only command we can use to see the configuration register. I can see my configuration if I have one stored in here with the show startup-config. Of course, I can use shortcuts. Show start would work just fine. But remember, this is not stored here by default on most routers. There will be nothing in here. You have to save it in there yourself. And to come back here for a second, to see our iOS in Flash, to see everything in Flash memory, we type show Flash. This will show us everything in Flash. Now, to see everything in RAM, you can't necessarily type a command to do that, but you could type show running-config to see your current configuration. Also stored in RAM is the routing tables, ARP cache, packet buffers, and so on. And so here's some of the, and show IP route will show me my routing table, as we'll see, and we talked about in the earlier modules. But here's some of the other commands that you can use. Show interfaces to see some interfaces. Show lines, show your console and auxiliary. This isn't such a helpful command anymore, but it used to be. Show version is a very helpful command and one we'll talk about more in this module. It's, again, only way we can see our configuration register.